The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from the nation's capital and are a public service of your television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
Mr. President, I want to say a few words about the Sessions nomination for Attorney General, but I also want to express my very strong opposition to Senator McConnell's effort to deny Senator Elizabeth Warren the opportunity to express her point of view. And there are two separate issues. Number one, this is the United States Senate, and the American people expect from us a vigorous debate on the important issues facing this country. And I think all of us are aware that issues of civil rights, issues of voter suppression, issues of criminal justice reform are enormous issues that people from one end of this country feel very strongly about. And those are issues that the next Attorney General of the United States will be dealing with. So clearly, we need a vigorous discussion regarding the qualifications of President Trump's nominee, Jeff Sessions, to be Attorney General. We need to hear all points of view. And the idea that a letter and a statement made by Coretta Scott King, the widow of Martin Luther King Jr., at the United States, a letter that she wrote, could not be presented and spoken about here on the floor of the Senate is, to me, incomprehensible. And it comes at a time when we have a president who has initiated, and I hope it will not stand, a ban on Muslims entering the United States of America. We have a president who refers to a judge who issues a ruling in opposition to the president as a so-called judge, which tells every judge in America that they will be insulted and marginalized by this president if they dare to disagree with him. I was under the impression we had three separate branches of government: Congress, the president, and the judiciary, equal branches, not to be insulted because one branch disagrees with another branch. And here we are now on the floor of the Senate, and one of our outstanding senators, Senator Warren of Massachusetts, brings forth a statement made by one of the heroines, one of the great leaders of the civil rights movement of the United States of America, a statement that she made before the Senate Judiciary Committee on March 13, 1986. And anyone who knows anything about Coretta Scott King understands this is not a vicious woman. This is not a woman who is engaged in personal attacks. This is a woman who stood up and fought for civil rights, for dignity, for justice, for her whole life. And yet, when Senator Warren read her statement, she was told that she could no longer participate in this debate over Senator Sessions' nomination, which I regard as an outrage. And I want the American people to make a decision of whether or not we should be able to look at Senator Sessions' record and hear from one of the heroines of the civil rights movement. And this is a statement made before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Thursday, March 13th, 1986. And this is what the statement is about. Let the American people judge. And this is how it goes. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, this is from Coretta Scott King. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to express my strong opposition to the nomination of Jefferson Sessions for federal district judgeship for the Southern District of Alabama. My long-standing commitment, which I shared with my husband Martin, to protect and enhance the rights of Black Americans, rights which include equal access to the democratic process, compels me to testify today. Civil rights leaders, including my husband and Albert Turner, have fought long and hard to achieve free and unfettered access to the ballot box. Mr. Sessions has used the awesome power of his office to chill the free exercise of the vote by black citizens in the district he now seeks to serve as a federal judge. This simply cannot be allowed to happen. Mr. Sessions' conduct as U.S. Attorney, from his politically motivated voting fraud prosecutions to his indifference toward criminal violations of civil rights laws, indicates that he lacks the temperament, fairness, and judgment to be a federal judge. The Voting Rights Act was and still is vitally important to the future of democracy in the United States. I was privileged to join Martin and many others during the Selma to Montgomery March for voting rights in 1965. Martin was particularly impressed by the determination to get the franchise of blacks in Selma and neighboring Perry County. As he wrote, quote, "Certainly no community in the history of the Negro struggle has responded with the enthusiasm of Selma and her neighboring town of Marion, where Birmingham depended largely upon students and unemployed adults to participate in nonviolent protest of the denial of the franchise. Selma has involved fully 10% of the Negro population in active demonstrations, and at least half the Negro population of Marion was arrested on one day," end of quote. Martin was referring, of course, to a group that included the defendants recently prosecuted for assisting elderly and illiterate blacks to exercise that franchise. In fact, Martin anticipated from the depth of their commitment 20 years ago that a united political organization would remain in Perry County long after the other marchers had left. This organization, the Perry County Civic League, started by Mr. Turner, Mr. Hogue, and others, as Martin predicted, continued, quote, "to direct the drive for votes and other rights," end of quote. In the years since the Voting Rights Act was passed, black Americans in Marion, Selma, and elsewhere have made important strides in their struggle to participate actively in the electoral process. The number of blacks registered to vote in key southern states has doubled since 1965. This would not have been possible without the Voting Rights Act. However, blacks still fall far short of having equal participation in the electoral process. Particularly in the South, efforts continue to be made to deny blacks access to the polls, even where blacks constitute the majority of the voters. It has been a long uphill struggle to keep alive the vital legislation that protects the most fundamental right to vote. A person who has exhibited so much hostility to the enforcement of those laws and thus to the exercise of those rights by black people should not be elevated to the federal bench. The irony of Mr. Sessions' nomination is that, if confirmed, he will be given life tenure for doing with a federal prosecution what the local sheriffs accomplished 20 years ago with clubs and cattle prods. 20 years ago, when we marched from Selma to Montgomery, the fear of voting was real, as the broken bones and bloody heads in Selma and Marion bore witness. As my husband wrote at the time, quote, "It was not just a slick imagination that conjured up the vision of a public official sworn to uphold the law who forced an inhuman march upon hundreds of Negro children, who ordered the Reverend James Bevel to be chained to his sickbed, who clubbed a Negro woman registrant, and who callously inflicted repeated brutalities and indignities upon nonviolent Negroes peacefully petitioning for their constitutional rights to vote." Free exercise of voting rights is so fundamental to American democracy that we cannot tolerate any form of infringement of those rights. Of all the groups who have been disenfranchised in our nation's history, none has struggled longer or suffered more in the attempt to win the vote than black citizens. No group has had access to the ballot box denied so persistently and intently. Over the past century, a broad array of schemes have been used in attempts to block the black vote. The range of techniques developed with the purpose of repressing black voting rights run the gamut from the straightforward application of brutality against black citizens who tried to vote to such legalized frauds as, quote, grandfather clause, end of quote, exclusions, and rigged literacy tests. The action taken by Mr. Sessions in regard to the 1984 voting fraud prosecutions represent just one more technique used to intimidate black voters and thus deny them this most precious franchise. The investigations into the absentee voting process were conducted only in the black belt counties where blacks had finally achieved political power in the local government. Whites had been using the absentee process to their advantage for years without incident. Then, when blacks, realizing its strength, began to use it with success, criminal investigations were begun. In these investigations, Mr. Sessions, as U.S. Attorney, exhibited an eagerness to bring to trial and convict 3 leaders of the Perry County Civic League, including Albert Turner, despite evidence clearly demonstrating their innocence of any wrongdoing. Furthermore, in initiating the case, Mr. Sessions ignored allegations of similar behavior by whites, choosing instead to chill the exercise of the franchise by blacks by his misguided investigation. In fact, Mr. Sessions sought to punish older black civil rights activists, advisors, and colleagues of my husband who had been key figures in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. These were persons who, realizing the potential of the absentee vote among blacks, had learned to use the process within the bounds of legality and had taught others to do the same. The only sin they committed was being too successful in gaining votes. The scope and character of the investigations conducted by Mr. Sessions also warrant grave concern. Witnesses were selectively chosen in accordance with the favorability of their testimony to the government's case. Also, the prosecution illegally withheld from the defense critical statements made by witnesses. Witnesses who did testify were pressured and intimidated into submitting the quote-unquote correct testimony. Many elderly blacks were visited multiple times by the FBI, who then hauled them over 180 miles by bus to a grand jury in Mobile, where they could more easily have testified at a grand jury 20 miles away in Selma. These voters and others have announced they are now never going to vote again. I urge you to consider carefully Mr. Sessions' conduct in these matters. Such a review, I believe, raises serious questions about his commitment to the protection of the voting rights of all American citizens and consequently his fair and unbiased judgment regarding this fundamental right. When the circumstances and facts surrounding the indictments of Al Turner, his wife Evelyn, and Spencer Hogue are analyzed, it becomes clear that the motivation was political and the result frightening the wide-scale chill of the exercise of the ballot for blacks who suffered so much to receive that right in the first place. Therefore, it is my strongly held view that the appointment of Jefferson Sessions to the federal bench would irreparably damage the work of my husband, Al Turner, and countless others who risked their lives and freedom over the past 20 years to ensure equal participation in our democratic system. The exercise of the franchise is an essential means by which our citizens ensure that those who are governing will be responsible. My husband called it the #1 civil right. The denial of access to the ballot box ultimately results in the denial of other fundamental rights. For it is only when the poor and disadvantaged are empowered that they are able to participate actively in the solutions to their own problems. We still have a long way to go before we can say that minorities no longer need to be concerned about discrimination at the polls. Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, and Asian Americans are grossly underrepresented at every level of government in America. If we are going to make our timeless dream of justice through democracy a reality, we must take every possible step to ensure that the spirit and intent of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the 15th Amendment of the Constitution is honored. The federal courts hold a unique position in our constitutional system, ensuring that minorities and other citizens without political power have a forum in which to vindicate their rights. Because of this unique role, it is essential that the people selected to be federal judges respect the basic tenets of our legal system, respect for individual rights, and a commitment to equal justice for all. The integrity of the courts, and thus the rights they protect, can only be maintained if citizens feel confident that those selected as federal judges will be able to judge with fairness others holding differing views. I do not believe Jefferson Sessions possesses the requisite requirement, competence, and sensitivity to the rights guaranteed by the federal civil rights laws to qualify for appointment to the federal district court. Based on his record, I believe his confirmation would have a devastating effect on not only the judicial system in Alabama, but also on the progress we have made everywhere toward fulfilling my husband's dream that he envisioned over 20 years ago. I therefore urge the Senate Judiciary Committee to deny his confirmation. I thank you for allowing me to share my views. That is the letter that Coretta Scott King, one of the great leaders of our civil rights movement, who along with her husband and many others finally managed to get past the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That's it. That is the letter that Senator Elizabeth Warren wanted to communicate to other members of the Senate as part of the discussion as to whether or not Jeff Sessions should become our next Attorney General. So let me say that I will vote against Jeff Sessions for a number of reasons, but the idea that in the United States Senate, the same exact letter that I just read and the American people have heard it, was there some kind of vicious personal attacks? This is a letter written by one of the leaders of the civil rights movement expressing strong concerns about Jeff Sessions before the Judiciary Committee in 1986, opposing his nomination to be a federal judge. And yet Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren, one of our leading senators, was denied the right to read that letter to inform fellow senators and the American people. I think Leader McConnell owes Senator Warren an apology, and I believe that it is unconscionable and outrageous that Senator Warren not be allowed to participate in the discussion about whether Jeff Sessions becomes our next Attorney General. There is a great fear in this country right now, starting at the White House, where we have a president who has issued a ban on Muslim visitors coming into this country. There is a fear that we have a president who, when he denigrates a judge as a so-called judge, because this judge issued an opinion in disagreement with the president, that we are moving in a direction which is un-American, which is moving us toward an authoritarian society. We pride ourselves as a nation because when we have differences of opinion, we debate those differences. We tolerate differences of opinion. That's what democracy is about in our country. That's what freedom of speech is about. And that is what debate is about here in the United States Senate. So I'm going to vote against Jeff Sessions to become our next Attorney General, but I am even more alarmed about the decision of the majority leader here in the Senate to deny one of our leading senators the right to voice her opinion, the right to put into the congressional record what I have just said. And if Mr. McConnell or anybody else wants to deny me the right to debate Jeff Sessions' qualifications, go for it. But I'm here. I will participate in debate. I will oppose Jeff Sessions. And I think Senator Warren is owed an apology. With that, Mr. President, I yield and I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the statement of Coretta Scott King.
Is there objection? Without objection.